So there's this new law on the table in Australia. It was created for a really good reason, to fight hate. But, and this is a huge but, it's become so controversial that some critics are saying its design is so broken it could lead to some absolutely shocking results. On the surface, what's not to like? The goal of the Combating Antisemitism, Hate, and Extremism Bill 2026 is pretty straightforward. Give the government the power to shut down hate groups. It seems like exactly the kind of thing we'd want. And here is where things get, well, pretty wild. One critic has laid out a case that the law is so fundamentally flawed that if you follow the letter of the law, you could technically use it to label an organization like the Victoria Police Force a hate group. I know, it sounds insane. How is that even possible? Well, that question is exactly what we're going to unpack. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the bill itself. Then we'll introduce the two clashing critiques. After that, we'll get into the constitutional arguments, see how they stack up, and then get to that wild stress test I just mentioned. And finally, we'll look at the big choice lawmakers now have to make. So, let's start here. The Combating Antisemitism, Hate, and Extremism Bill 2026. This is Parliament's answer to some very real, very serious problems. But as people have started digging into the details, two completely different ways of looking at it have emerged. And it's forcing everyone to take a step back. The best way to get your head around this debate is to think of it as a clash between a renovator and an architect. The renovator looks at the building and says, yeah, the foundation is good, it just needs some work. But the architect comes in and says, no, the whole design is wrong, we have to tear it down and start over. So meet our renovator, Emeritus Professor Patrick Parkinson. He's a highly respected legal expert, he's on board with what the bill's trying to do, he thinks its heart is in the right place. But he argues it just needs some careful fixes, tweak the wording here and there to make sure it works properly. And then we meet our architect, Rohan Michael Brown. And this is where the story just takes a turn you don't see coming. In his own words, he describes his situation like this. This critique isn't coming from some fancy law firm or a university office. It's a full-blown structural analysis from a place of incredible adversity. And this really boils it all down. Parkinson's view is, the basic idea is fine, let's just amend it and get it passed. Brown's view is the complete opposite. He's saying the entire structure is broken, you can't patch this up, it needs to be thrown out completely. All right, let's get into the heart of their disagreement. This is where we see how they look at the bill's effect on some of our most basic legal principles. This is the real constitutional battleground. But first, a really quick bit of Law 101. We need to know about this idea of proportionality. It's a test our high court uses all the time. It basically asks, is the government solution a good fit for the problem? Or is it like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut? And you can see this sledgehammer idea perfectly right here. When it comes to free speech, Parkinson says, yeah, we can limit it as long as it's tied to things like intimidation or violence. We just need to draw the line carefully. But Brown says the bill doesn't just draw a line, it uses a sledgehammer by criminalizing speech based on how someone feels, which is a huge overreach that could shut down all sorts of important debate. And it's the same story with the religious exemptions in the bill. Parkinson, our renovator, sees them as a practical, necessary fix to protect religious freedom. But Brown, the architect, looks at them and sees more proof of a flawed design. He argues that the law is basically saying some types of speech are more important than others, and that's a really dangerous road to go down constitutionally. So, we've got two very different arguments. How can we tell which one holds more water? Well, we can bring in a referee, the High Court of Australia. We can look at their past rulings and see whose arguments line up best. And when you do that, when you actually map their points against well-established high court principles, well, a pretty clear pattern starts to show up. Brown's architectural critique shows a consistently strong alignment with how the court thinks. Parkinson's arguments, on the other hand, are often rated as partial, weak, or limited in comparison. Okay, but an analysis of legal doctrine can feel a bit abstract, right? This is where Brown takes his argument to the next level. He runs a stress test to show what these so-called architectural flaws could actually mean in the real world. And honestly, it is jaw-dropping. So first, you have to get this core mechanism of the bill. A government minister gets to designate a group as a hate group. They don't need a court conviction to do this. It can be based on old reports or inquiries. And, this part is critical, the law specifically says the government doesn't have to provide procedural fairness, meaning no notice, no hearing. This sets off what Brown calls a criminalization cascade. It starts with some old reports. A minister then makes a designation. And because there's no hearing, bam, just like that, being a member of that group, helping run it, or even giving it money instantly becomes a major crime. So here's the stress test. Brown points out that the bill has no exemptions for government agencies. He then notes that there are public records, we're talking royal commissions, documenting historical discriminatory conduct by Victoria Police, stuff the organization itself has since apologized for. So his conclusion is that under the law as it is written, that public record could be used as the reasonable grounds to designate the police force a hate group. Now let's be super clear. This is not an attack on the police. It's a test of the law's design. It forces you to ask a really uncomfortable question. If following a law to the letter leads you to a ridiculous outcome, is the problem with the example you picked? Or is the problem baked into the very DNA of the law itself? And all of this leads to the final, difficult choice that the parliamentary committee now has to make, looking at these two completely opposite reviews of the bill. They've basically got two roads in front of them. There's Parkinson's path, take the expert advice, make the suggested fixes, and pass an amended law. Or there's Brown's path, see his critique as the blueprint for an inevitable high court loss, and either withdraw the bill entirely or redesign it from the ground up. Brown really puts a fine point on it with this quote. By lodging this incredibly detailed analysis, he's put Parliament on notice. They can't say they weren't warned about these deep, structural risks before they vote. It's now part of the official record. And that leaves all of us with a final, pretty heavy question. When the potential for a new law to go disastrously wrong is laid out this clearly, this publicly, before it's even passed, it makes you wonder about accountability. Who is ultimately responsible for the consequences?